Hello, everybody. Welcome to this second week in the course. We're going to be discussing ethics this week, and so here we go, an introduction to ethics. To start off, we can sort of think about the study of ethics as a subject matter from a philosophical standpoint. What we're going to sort of be doing, or what we do in thinking about ethics from a philosophical standpoint, is ask questions like what ethics is and how ethics ought to be done, ought to be practiced, ought to be thought about, etc. So the first thing that you might sort of do as a philosophically, like kind of confronting the question of what ethics exactly is try to distinguish it into its main subfields. Ethics itself comes in normally what people think of as three major subfields. It's structured along these lines, depending on how, like what kinds of questions ultimately get asked. And the three major subfields are meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. Ethics as a subject matter tends to look at questions, regarding specific kinds of concepts. And those concepts are the following ones here, right? Whether or not actions are good or bad, right or wrong, what kinds of norms exist and require us to do certain kinds of things, what it is to have an obligation or a duty, right? So you ought to do something if you're obligated to do it. What it is for a person to have a right against you or right to do something. What's permissible or impermissible, what's things that are valuable, things that have certain kinds of moral value, what it is that you should do again, what actions are is actually often thought of as part of ethical theorizing, consequences of actions, and then whether or not certain things are morally blameworthy or praiseworthy. The first of our sort of subfields of ethics is applied ethics. And applied ethics is the most sort of practical version or subfield of ethics, and asks generally questions about what we should do in specific situations, right? So ethics as a whole asks questions like what should we do? Applied ethics involves applying ethical theorizing to specific cases like abortion or euthanasia, maybe the opioid crisis or disaster relief, right? Anything that you can think of today where people are concerned about what we should or shouldn't do, how we should treat one another in particular cases relative to specific things that have happened sort of in the environment or in the world. These are all going to be applied ethical situations and cases. Generally, what applied ethicists do is they attempt to apply certain ethical theories to specific cases in order to determine what it is that's best or what's just or what's fair in that scenario for the people involved. In a way, you can kind of think of this as what happens in the law, but the law is a little bit different specifically than applied ethics because there are further constraints. You might think more, generally of applied ethics as akin to something like economics or engineering when it comes to thinking about like mathematics, right? So math is this very abstract thing that we learn to do in elementary school oftentimes and beyond. And then, economics or engineering, once you start to get towards like college age, you might learn about these topics where economics and engineering both take the mathematical underpinnings that you've learned and try to apply them to real world situations, right? So in economics, you take a bunch of mathematical models and attempt to apply them to certain kinds of markets, whereas in engineering, you take a lot of, math, geometry, all different, kinds, and apply it to physical situations for building things or determining, how fast something can go and how much stress something can have on it. Normative ethics is the kind of standard ethical theorizing that you might be somewhat familiar with. Normative ethics is kind of what everyone thinks of when they think about ethics. Normative ethics sort of asks questions like, what actions are right? What actions are wrong? Why are those actions the right ones and the other ones the wrong ones? And normative ethical theories tend to give explanations on the basis of certain claims about moral values. So you end up with a basic theory about moral value, and then on the basis of that theory of moral value, you get an explanation of which questions or of which actions are right and which actions are wrong. And those, generally try to coincide with our everyday intuitions about which kinds of actions are right and wrong, right? So clearly, murder is wrong, whereas, maybe speeding on the freeway is not wrong. It might be, illegal, but it's not immoral, as long as you're not endangering someone. Generally, there are three sort of widely recognized normative ethical theories. Those include utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. And each of these theories we'll be looking at as it goes. They each bring a totally different point of view to the table when it comes to the study of normative ethical theory. Metaethics is sort of the broadest category in this study of ethics. Metaethics basically goes above and beyond generally sort of straightforward ethical theorizing. Metaethics asks the larger questions, like how it is in the first place that certain actions could even be right or wrong, what it is for something to be good, what it is for something to be bad, how moral value can even exist in the world, whether or not it depends upon human beings and our minds, or if it depends on God, or if it depends, on nothing. It just exists on its own. Maybe it doesn't exist. There are moral nihilists that think, things don't, morality doesn't exist at all. Metaethics generally studies what we might think of as the metaphysics and epistemology of ethics as a whole. That is discussing things like what exactly certain kinds of core ethical things are, like goodness, and then also how we know about any of these things, right? So supposing that we are creatures that have just evolved over time, how could we possibly gain access to these, deep ethical considerations about the world? Some questions that, metaethics might ask are things like, what is a norm? What kinds of things are norms? And how, if at all, do norms actually provide reasons for us to act in certain ways? Similarly, like, what is an obligation and how do they work? How do they actually require anything of us? And then how do we know anything about any of these things? How do we know what any of these things are, and how do we pick up on how these things actually affect our lives? In our class, as things go forward, we're going to be looking in this first sort of section of the class at each of these different kinds of questions. We're going to be starting off by discussing some applied ethical or unapplied ethical scenario, focusing particularly on the case of abortion. That's the rest of this week. Then next week, we will be discussing the ethics of relativism and divine command theory, two theories that are, mostly best placed in metaethical theorizing, questioning whether or not morality exists and whether or not morality depends upon God. Finally, we will turn to, for a couple of weeks, the theories of utilitarianism, the deontological theory of Kant, and Aristotle's virtue ethics, in order to sort of see these three major approaches to general everyday ethical issues.